Okay, so I think we should go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the New York City Classical Guitar Society. For any of you here that I haven't met, my name is John Olson. I'm the president of the society, and we do these meetings once a month, and we're pleased this month to have as our very special guest, Fred Hand. I know Fred will be familiar to many of you. For those of you that maybe don't know him or his work so well, this will be a great introduction. And I think even those of you who do think you know him well are going to learn something about his career tonight, because it's been an amazing and quite varied career, and that's really the theme of the evening. So I don't think I really need to introduce Fred too much, but I do just want to sort of frame our discussion a little bit by giving you a little bit of an overview of kind of some of the things he's done over the course of his career, and then we'll get into some discussion and fill in some of the details. So Fred's been a guitarist since his childhood, and grew up admiring Segovia and Bream, and initially he went on kind of what you might say is kind of a standard path, doing solo concert tours, but he pretty quickly evolved into doing much broader range of activities. So those include things like appearing in Shakespeare in the Park with some actors who you may have heard of, but who were pretty unknown at the time, like Meryl Streep and Morgan Freeman. He did some work in Broadway productions. Since 1984, he's been the resident guitarist and lutenist for the Metropolitan Opera, where he's accompanied some of the great singers of the world, like Pavarotti and Domingo and Fleming. And then he's also done some really interesting ensemble work with a group called Jazz Antiqua that we'll talk about a little bit later, and some film and TV scoring that was important in his life as well. And then, of course, many of you are familiar with his fantastic catalog of compositions for solo guitar, other instruments. And he's had a distinguished teaching career, teaching performance, arranging composition in several colleges and universities. So with that little background, why don't we just go all the way back to the beginning?
Sure.
And Fred, welcome. Great to have you here. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you.
And let's start with where it all started. How did you start being interested in playing the classical guitar?
Sure. So when I was 6, my mother took me to a Segovia concert at Town Hall, and I was completely enthralled. And I remember we were walking up the center aisle, leaving the auditorium, and I turned to her and I said, "I'm going to be a classical guitarist. That's it. I've decided I'm going to be a classical guitarist." And she said, okay. And I asked for classical guitar and lessons, and she thought, well, maybe not right away. How about, well, I was going to say ukulele, but we now know it's ukulele. And I said, no, I want guitar. And I remember going to sleep every night to Segovia records. I was just captured and enthralled. And every year I would ask for guitar lessons and a guitar. And when I was 9, at this point I was singing in the Brooklyn Museum chorus, and the conductor of the chorus was a wonderful man named John Motley, and he played the guitar, was studying with Puerto Rican guitarist Manuel Gayol, and he said, I'll give you guitar lessons. So we got a guitar when I was 9, and after a few months, he said, I'm going to have to give you over to my teacher because you're already ahead in the book that I'm using. So then I started to study with Manuel Gayol. And I should add that during those years, I was also going to summer camp. And I remembered that the counselors that played the guitar always seemed to have a lot of pretty girls around them. And it was sort of, I was too young to really understand what that meant, but it was sort of like note to self. Remember this for later. So that was my beginning with classical guitar.
Those were a couple of pictures of you, I think, at 9 years old.
Yeah, one was in Central Park.
Okay, yeah. And I'm curious, as you got older, I've got another picture I can share here of you at a little bit later age. I don't know if it's showing up. Yeah, at I think 13. So as you got older, did you maintain that same enthusiasm about the guitar? Was that just sort of straight through your youth that you were crazy about the guitar, or did you have other interests that sort of came in and competed?
Well, until I was about 13, it was all guitar all the time. However, when I hit about 13, and that's when that shot was taken, I was enthralled with basketball. And I wanted so much just to play basketball. And I actually gave up the guitar. I stopped taking guitar lessons. And I played basketball. I joined the Boys Club of America League. And I lived right across the street from my junior high school, which had basketball courts outside. And I played on the weekends all day long, and then went inside to the gym after that and played. And I did that for 2 years, so I gave up the guitar for 2 years. But then when I was 15, I went to Madison Square Garden to see the New York Knicks play. And I noticed that the shortest player was 6'2". And at that time, I was about 5 foot. And I came to the very, lucid realization that I was too short for basketball. Now, I am brushing over one other little factor, which was I wasn't nearly good enough. I mean, I was okay on the playground, but I wasn't going any further with basketball. So I went back to the guitar, and my new teacher was Albert Valdez Blaine, who was one of the great teachers in New York City at that time, and he was a protege of Segovia. And the style in teaching then was really kind of like tough love. So I was used to Manuel Gael, who was very fatherly, and Albert was a great teacher, but it was a whole other story, But he was great, and he taught me so well. He really did.
And were you strictly playing classical?
Yes, only classical.
When did other styles of music become part of what you were interested in?
So what happened was when I had to go to high school, there was a very special high school. It doesn't exist anymore. It's merged with another high school, but it was called the High School of Music and Art. And you had to take a test to get in, and then when you got in, you had to play an orchestral instrument. I played the viola. And I studied composition. There was a beautiful teacher there who taught composition. And there was a whole other world of music, because up until that point, I only knew Giuliani and Carulli and Legnani. And now I'm hearing Stravinsky and Samuel Barber and everything, Ravel. So that was a tremendous influence in my teenage years, going to the High School of Music and Art. But the other thing that was equally, if not more so influential, was my best friend in high school was a great jazz pianist. His name was Andrew Laverne. And he turned me on to Miles and Bill Evans and John Coltrane, everybody. And that, the music that you love during that time, 15, 16, 17, it stays with you forever. And so I had these other influences. I also had a very good close friend from camp that would play me Brahms, intermezzos and chamber music and Mozart. And so I started to realize that there was a much greater world of music outside of the guitar. And that's not in any way to diminish the beauty of the guitar, but I wanted that. I wanted to participate in that, and I really couldn't see how. And I also got the inclination to write music, and did that in that composition class. But when I got into college, and at that time, you weren't considered a serious composer unless you were writing very avant-garde music. And I wasn't. I was ashamed of the fact that I was writing melodies and harmonies. So I hid my compositions and didn't really work on them much in college. So I had some competing musical interests. I also studied jazz guitar during that time. During that same time, this was when a lot of things came together. There were two great studio musicians, Jay Berliner and Stuart Scharf, and Jay was accompanying Harry Belafonte, and Stuart was working with Carly Simon. And they really took me under their wing and took me to concerts and showed me arrangements. And so I had all of these influences and not really any way to unify them. And that became a life struggle for a while, for quite a bit, But that was what was going on in high school. Now, at the end of high school, when I went to college, there were only 2 colleges in the entire United States where you could study classical guitar. In American University in Washington and Mannes College in New York. And I seriously was considering going into being a jazz guitarist, but as a jazz guitarist I was really a novice, pretty much. And as a classical guitarist I was well on the way. So I went into Mannes and studied classical guitar and did the traditional repertoire and traditional training.
Okay. Okay, and then this was also a period where you you studied for some time with Julian Bream. Is that correct?
Well, what happened with Julian Bream was the great instrument maker David Rubio at that time, who was Julian Bream's instrument maker, was living in New York in Greenwich Village. And I met him through a friend, and he encouraged me to try out, audition for Julian Bream's master class in Stratford, Ontario. That was when I was 19. And I did, and I got into the class. And so that was my first encounter, my first personal encounter with Julian. I had gone to all of his concerts and had all of his recordings. And I felt that I was already studying with him in the sense that I was listening so closely to how he was fingering things and using his additions. And so when I finally got to meet him, it was in a master class situation. And we hit it off, which was very fortunate for me. He liked to play ping pong with me. And he also liked, I could back him up when he did his Django Reinhardt imitations. I could play chords behind him, so he liked that. So we would do that at parties.
What did you play for him in the class? Do you remember?
I do remember. I played the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro. And what I remember is class was in a horseshoe, and I was somewhere 6th, 7th, right in the middle, and I was so incredibly nervous that first day. And the whole morning session went, and I didn't get called. And we were in the afternoon session. Each session was like 3 hours. And we got right up to me. And he said, okay, well, that's it for today. So I had a very uneasy night. And the next day I played. But then the CBC was invited in to do a little documentary on him. And he asked me to play, to do a lesson on the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro with him for the CBC, so that was really quite a great honor. And I think that after that we stayed in touch, and I saw him at his concerts, and we would go out afterwards. And at some point I mentioned to him that I might be applying for Fulbright, and would he be willing to study? And I said, well, we don't even need to talk about it now because it goes through stages, and I wouldn't even call you until it gets to a latter stage. So that's what happened. It got to the point where they were seriously considering doing this. And at that time, I had already graduated college and was teaching at the University of Connecticut. And I called him up. I remember the April before the fall that I would go. And I said, look, this is, they're serious about doing this. Would you be willing to teach me? And I had my, I was, oh my God, this is my hero, right? And he said, well, of course, Fred, is that why you're calling? Oh, of course. It was just, oh my God, this is incredible. Thank you so much. It was like the heavens had opened. This couldn't be better. I told everybody I was going to study with Julian Bream. I left my apartment in New York. I just gave it up. I left my job at the University of Connecticut. I had just gotten married, got over to London. I called up Julian Bream, and he said, well, hello, Fred, how are you? What brings you to London? Well, he had forgotten about the whole thing. Then he said, well, come by my flat next week. I'm making a recording right now, and we'll talk about it. And then when I went, he showed me his schedule, and he was in the UK about 2 days a month. He was touring everywhere. And he said, I can only see you this time and this time and this time. And I said, great, whatever, And we had a lesson, and the lesson went for 2 hours. And after the 2 hours, he said, well, what else do you have? And I said, well, I don't have any more music. He said, well, next time bring more music. So the next lesson, which was about 3 weeks later, lasted 4 hours. And so even though he forgot I was coming, I have to say he could not have been more generous with his time. And that proceeded throughout the year. And it was an amazing experience. It really was. Obviously, it would be. But, people ask me what did I get from that? And of course, there were the individual pieces, and the fingerings and phrasing and all the talk about architecture. And he would run over to the piano, and play passages from Berlioz. It was amazing knowledge of music. But really, what I think most of all was like a transmission. I was sitting next to him. I mean, really close, a few feet away, for hours, listening to him play. He loved to play for me. He said, "Hey, I'm working on a new piece. I have to play it in a few weeks. Listen to this." It was the Walton Bagatelles. Oh my God, So in listening to him play, for one thing, you see where the standard is. The standard is up here, and it's like it brings you up just listening to him play. It makes you rise, it makes you elevate your standard. And I would say that would be the single most important thing that I got from him, was to just absorb the beauty of his sound, the vitality of his rhythmic energy, the color, the extreme colors that he could get out of the guitar. So it was truly a remarkable experience. But during that time, I also was experiencing a bit of an unsettling experience. Number one, well, he's beyond great. He's just a god of the guitar. But what am I going to do? What am I going to do with this? And also, what about my desire to play with other musicians, which I really did want to do? I wanted to be part of that other musical world as well. And what about my desire to play jazz and to improvise? And I was really searching for my artistic soul, So this was the greatest gift one could have, is to study with a genius like Julian Bream. And yet, I knew that something inside of me was moving in another direction.
So let's get to that other direction in just a second. But of course, we just lost Julian Bream last month.
Yes.
And you wrote a piece dedicated to him called For Julian, which you premiered at a Bream tribute concert that Ben Verdery put together at the 92nd Street Y.
Mm-hmm.
Should we play?
Yeah, I think it would be
that
great.
Piece here?
I think it would
do you
be
want
great
to
to
say
play
anything
that piece.
about?
Yeah,
that,
I would just say this, that first of all, I want to thank Ben for putting together such a beautiful event. That I decided to write a piece for him and play it on the lute. And in the music, what I was trying to capture was the two greatest contributions, I think, that he gave, which was the revival of Renaissance music. So there were a lot of idiomatic lute things in there. And also his bringing contemporary music more to the forefront and having great contemporary composers write for him. So it has those two elements. I was using chords in fourths rather than thirds and odd time meters. And I transcribed, after I performed it, I transcribed it for the guitar, so it would have more than one performance.
All right, so let's listen to it on the guitar.
Wow. Mm. What beautiful pictures you got, John. Those
Oh,
were
beautiful, beautiful recording and beautiful piece. And I should mention on the photos, that last photo was actually taken by our own society member, Bruce Parker.
Oh,
Way
wow.
back in the day. I think Bruce is on the call here, and he sent that after Bream died. So thank you, Bruce. Beautiful, beautiful photo. Well, so after the Bream period, you were just starting to talk about how that was a dream come true, but it also
Yeah,
was
and
kind of a launching point for maybe going in other directions as
well,
well.
oddly, as soon as I came back, I say oddly because I just had this incredible classical guitar experience, I made a recording. It was not a commercial release. It was called Double Exposure. And on one side, it was classical guitar. And on the other side, I had a jazz quartet. And I was able, because I had a friend whose dad was producing jingles, to get the greatest jazz musicians in New York. And that was the beginning of really trying to express myself, in this way. And I remember taking the recording to a record producer. There it is, and that's what I looked like back then. That was actually taken in England, that picture when I was studying with Julian Bream. Look at that hair. Oh man, I can't believe it. And the record producer said, well, this is lovely, but he says, we can't market this. We don't know what bin to put this in. He said, if you could find some way to combine these two things, you would really have something. And at the time, that really didn't mean anything to me because I didn't have a clue as to how one would do that. So, but it stuck in my head, as an idea. But again, I had these very sort of competing interests that I couldn't see a way to unify. I would, but it would happen in a kind of a very different way. So after Double Exposure, I went. I had my great friend Tana got me a trip to Sweden, where I gave a concert, and I got a record deal with a Swedish company, and I made a recording called Volume 1. And again, it was classical on one side and jazz on the other. In fact, I think it might have even been a little more incorporated than that. And I'm not sure if you have that album cover or not, but that was sort of continuing on the path of, there we go. There I am playing the vihuela, which is what I traveled when I did my solos with a guitar, a lute, and a vihuela. And I loved playing that vihuela, and I was able to do a lot of jazz on the vihuela because I would just tune it up like a guitar and play it. So I was on my way towards something, but still not quite there. And then I was still playing solo concerts at this time. And I decided to do something with improvisation and bring a bass player with me and have some piece in which I could improvise. And the first piece that I did that with was a piece called Missing Her, because it's a composed piece, but it has a improvised section. And I believe you have a clip of Missing Her, and this is the best example of when I started to combine my interest in concert.
Yeah, I will bring that up. Just a second.
This is where the pressure's on you, John.
Beautiful. Beautiful piece, beautiful video, beautiful guitar, Gary.
Thank you, thank you. John, I wanted to mention that while Julian Bream was the single most influential musician in my life, there was a second musician who was maybe as influential, and his name is Bill Evans. Bill Evans was one of the greatest jazz pianists ever. And during those teenage years, I listened to him more than anyone else. And in that recording that you just heard, my style of improvisation, what I was trying to cultivate, usually when you hear jazz guitarists take solos, they're taking these incredible solos over the chord changes. So they're playing with a pick and they're playing single line melodies, and the harmonies are played by someone else, or just, they're hearing them and playing them. But I wanted to try to play something like that. Now, a pianist has the left hand to play harmony while the right hand can play melody. And we really have, as guitarists, just four fingers, thumbs behind the neck, four fingers in the whatever open strings we have. But that's what I was working on. And of course, the greatest example of someone who does that so well is the great guitarist Gene Bertoncini, who's a friend of all of us, and who was very helpful for me too. And that was my goal, was to be able to play jazz in this way with a time feel, with a bass line, with harmonies, and whatever I could reach melodically. So that was a very important part of my development, was that kind of improvisation. Now, speaking of improvisation, when I got back from England, I was getting a lot of calls to play the lute, but not solo lute. I was getting calls to play lute in ensembles, really good ensembles like the Waverly Consort and Calliope. And when they would give me my part, there was no part. They would give me the gamba part. And I said, well, what am I supposed to play? And they said, well, you just play the chords, And what chords? So I had to assume everything was in root position until I heard a few clams, and I go, well, that's not in root position. But anyway, and then they would say, well, yeah, take a solo over that as well. But it was all in the Renaissance style. But it really hit me very strongly. Well, what's the difference between this and playing jazz? And the difference is the musical language. conceptually they were the same. And so people were doing that kind of thing back in the Renaissance. And so I learned that language and had fun doing that and played with these wonderful groups. But when I was hearing the material, like for instance, the Sephardic songs and Cantiga de Santa Maria, I was hearing modern harmonies. And they were, at that point, you know, they were harmonizing it in octaves and unisons and fifths and fourths, but nothing past that. And that led me to the idea of forming Jazz Antiqua, which would be a fusion of medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and jazz. But not jazz in the traditional sense of a tune and then everyone improvises in a tune. Jazz in the sense of a fully formed composition with pockets of improvisation and different pockets of improvisation that people would, they'd each have their own solo, but it would be on different material. And so we formed Jazz Antiqua right around the time, I would say about 1978. We rehearsed for a year, and then we gave our debut in New York, and it was very successful. And we wound up, that album, which was originally produced by Musical Heritage Society, later was taken over by RCA. And we wound up touring for 7 years. Maybe you can play just a little bit of Cantigas de Santa Maria so we can get a sense of what I'm talking about. That's a great example. We can not play the whole thing, but just a bit of it.
Sure. Yep, I'll bring that up.
These are Cantigas de Santa Maria with songs written in the 13th century for King Alfonso. And these were the songs I used to play in these Renaissance groups. I can talk over this, can I, John? Is that right?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a straight Renaissance treatment of that, played on the vihuela. I'm just harmonizing in fourths. A little bit of harmony, not too much. Starting to become more like Renaissance musicians at a party now with percussion. And now, welcome to the modern age. These are the harmonies I was hearing in my head when I was playing with the Renaissance group. And then it would lead, each person would have their own, you know, they have their own solo to do. And this was a very successful venture. There I am. The biggest challenge was improvising over those odd time meters. But in any case, we can leave that now. And I had a friend, he may be here tonight, Bill Matthews, and he said to me after he heard it, he said, well, you know, and I was only 30 years old at this time, he said, this is undoubtedly going to be the best thing you're ever going to do. I'll never forget that. And you know, he may have been right. It was a wonderful venture, and as I say, we did it for 7 years, and I realized that could easily be my career. I could have just kept going with that. But after 7 years, I didn't want that to be my career. There were other things I wanted to do. And other things were happening, very exciting things were happening. You know, I was working in New York and things would come up. One of the things that came up was our friend Gene Bertoncini got called to do a session for As the World Turns. And they were shooting some segments in Spain, and they said, we need 3 hours of Spanish guitar music. And Gene said, oh, well, I don't really do that, but call Fred Hand. And when they called me for 3 hours of Spanish guitars, remember that I was trying to break away from the traditional classical road. And so I didn't have anything close to 3 hours of classical guitar music, of Spanish guitar music. But I took my book of Tárrega to the session, and I took whatever pieces I had. But I also took a bunch of sketches that I knew that I could improvise on. And when I got there, to the session, I said, you know, I had these ideas that I think would be very useful for what you're trying to do. And they said, no. We want the real thing. Give us some granados. You know granados? I said, okay, here's Granados. And I was playing Spanish Dance number 5. And when I got to that spot in Spanish Dance number 5 where it goes, they stop the session, Could you give us 3 minutes of just that? And I said, yeah, but let me ask you something. Are we still calling this Granados? Because I'm thinking, they say, oh, no. You're the composer, fine. So I did 3 minutes of that. And then they said, what about those other sketches you said you had? So we did a 3-hour session. Then they said, could you come back tomorrow and do another 3 hours? Which I did. And that led to a 15-year career writing music for As the World Turns, Another World, Guiding Light, which I actually won an Emmy for, Search for Tomorrow, One Life to Live. They were all owned by Procter & Gamble, so they used the same production company. So
what years was this, Fred?
This would have been in the, I would say, early to mid 80s and beyond. That's when that happened. So that was happening while Jazz Antiqua was happening also, but I was getting busy in New York, doing things in New York. And this was an amazing way for me to express my music because I had to write all kinds of music, and I had to play on steel string guitar, and I was able to build a house based on the earnings that I got from the show and create my own recording studio. So this was an enormous break for me in that sense, and a great way for me to support my art, because at the end of the day, this was not really art. It was a way to make money, and I understood that. But there was still a skill involved in doing that. As far as the art goes, I'm just trying to think of what else was going on at that time.
Well, is this when you got into doing some movie work?
Yes, exactly. And what happened was, this is all happening at very similar times. I got a call I was doing some studio work in New York, and I got a call from a music producer to do a session. He said, we're going to do a session the next morning, and we'd like you to arrange a concerto by Vivaldi, a mandolin concerto. And we have a mandolinist, you'll play the orchestra part. And so you can do that, right? Just arrange the whole concerto by tomorrow. I said, yeah, no problem. And we did it. And we didn't know what it was for. We knew it was for a film, and that was it. And that evening, we got a call, both the mandolinist and I, and they said, well, they really love the music. They would love to have you guys in the film. There's a scene where you're street musicians, and you would just play. We've already pre-recorded it. You would just make believe you're playing we'd have the track playing. And we're going to shoot it in the evening in front of Tiffany's on 5th Avenue. So be there at such and such a time. Again, had no idea what this was. We show up. And it was very sweet, because this was a time in New York when there were a lot of street musicians, real street musicians. And there were some street musicians right across the street who were leaving. And they called out to us as they saw us setting up, and they said, hey, the money is better on this side of the street. And I shouted back to them, I said, I have a feeling tonight the money's going to be better on this side of the street. So we set up to do this movie. And it was a tracking shot. There were 2 actors coming up 5th Avenue, and we were doing our thing. And I see one of the actors is Dustin Hoffman. And I go, oh my God, this is not just any film, And they had the camera on a dolly, and they were pushing it across. And so there was a certain point where the musicians come into view. I think you have a clip of that. But before you show it, I just want to say that I find it actually very embarrassing when I look at it, because for whatever reason, they shot that scene 10 times. And the first several times, I just played normally, or I acted normally. But after a while, I started to become aware of exactly where the camera was and where I would be in the shot. And I started giving it a little more this and this and this and this and this. And by the time they got to the 10th take of it, it's like a bobblehead doll. And that's, of course, the one they took. So this is the scene. By the way, the music was used in other parts of the film and used for all their promotion, and it became known as the theme for Kramer versus Kramer, which won 5 Academy Awards.
Okay, so let's watch this very short clip of that scene.
That's terrific when that happens. I just want you to know I'm taking you along. Wow. Wow. That's terrific.
Embarrassing.
That's great. Do you want to? Should I play a little bit of the theme that you were just mentioning?
Sure.
Just to sort of hear how that was.
Sure.
So is this from the soundtrack or is this from a?
So they did have a soundtrack album, and they did quite a bit of that music on their soundtrack, and their soundtrack album sold very well. So they called me and asked me if I would do a whole album of that music, and so this is the same arrangement, different mandolinists, but it's and this is from the album. Well, I'll tell you about the album in a second, but you can play a little bit of that. It's a great piece, and it's been used in other films since then. And it really was a very big break in my career, because what happened after that came out, I got a call. I thought a friend was pranking me because I picked up the phone, and this is what I heard. "Is this Frederic Hand? We're calling from CBS Records. Are you the guy that did Kramer versus Kramer?" And I said, "Yes." "Well, we'd like you to do a whole album for CBS. Would you like to do an album for CBS Records?" I said, "Yeah, I think I would. Yeah." So he had me come in, and it was a bunch of marketing guys. And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do on this album?" They said, "You know what you did for Kramer? Just do that for a whole album." So I said, "Well, what are we going to call that album?" And no one had any idea. These are marketing guys. No one had any idea what to call it. So I said, "Why don't we call it Baroque and on the Street?" And they said, "Yeah." So that's me, by the way, in a wig and that costume. And the cat on the garbage can, literally, the trainer, he kept jumping off the can because he didn't like the feel of the can. But the trainer said, "Come on, we have to hurry up with this shoot because the cat has a gig at the Met later on that night." So I did that album, and that was considered one of the first crossover albums. This was before crossover was crossover. And there was a certain point where I realized there wasn't really anyone looking over my shoulder, that I could do other stuff than just straight Baroque arrangements with mandolin and banjo playing it. So I just started to get a little more creative. And you can just play a little clip of, I was hearing like a soprano saxophone playing a jazz ballad. Do you have a little bit of that great jazz saxophonist Jane Ira Bloom?
Yeah.
And she plays, this is Vivaldi Larghetto. beginning of sort of branching out, and I was hearing kind of a Michel Legrand and Umbrellas of Cherbourg, if anyone remembers that kind of thing, or that kind of treatment of Vivaldi. And I got bolder and bolder as the project went on to do more creative things. And that was, as I say, around the same time as Jazz Antiqua. And I used some of the Jazz Antiqua people, like Keith Underwood and Joe Passaro. But the album, both the film and the album, was a very big break for me in my career. And you can see that I was now using parts of my musicality, musicianship, and creativity that were well beyond the usual, not to in any way diminish, classical guitar, but I was going outside of that and actually also interacting with the world, the business world of music, which was wonderful, because there was a time in my 20s and beyond that I was thinking, well, how am I going to make a living? And then these wonderful things started to happen.
So this must be about the time then that you got involved with the Met, is that right?
Yes, exactly right. And what happened was, so I was playing with these early music groups, and the Met was doing a production that they had never done before of something called Francesca da Rimini by Zandonai, and it had a lute part in it. And the one of the percussionists at the Met was the founder of Calliope, his great Renaissance group who I had been playing with. So they asked him, well, who should we get for lute? And they recommended me. And my first rehearsal, I remember going, it was on a stage part. I walked out on stage, and there was Placido Domingo. And in the pit was the famous and now infamous James Levine. Those are the first two people I saw. And I thought, wow, this is great. And so we did that. And then we took it on tour, and then they did it again a few seasons later. And I do have first of all, I should just say that playing with the Met Orchestra, and I've been with them since 1984, it's hard to say this is the greatest experience of your life, but for a musician to be able to sit there, especially for guitarists, most of the time what I do at the Met is I sit and I listen to the orchestra. And I sometimes have to count a lot because I'm about to come in at some point. But the guitar doesn't play very much. When it does play, it counts, because sometimes it's solo. But to be able to be amongst the greatest orchestra in the world and listen to them play for hours and hours, it's been the greatest gig of my life. It really has. So I can't say enough about it. But I have a couple of stories. I know we're running out of time. I can tell one or the other. You know both of them, but got to tell one.
No, go ahead. We got plenty of time.
Okay,
they're good stories. We got time.
So the first season, after we did it in New York, we took the opera on tour, and I was supposed to check in with the soundman before every performance because I was wearing a wireless remote microphone on my lute. And after the first performance, he didn't show up for any of the other sound checks. And when I saw him, he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's fine. I know what it is and everything." Well, we get to the last stop, which is Detroit. And I should say also that I play backstage with the chorus, and then I walk out on stage. So I do the chorus bit, I walk out on stage, I play the first chord, and I hear the chord hit the back of the auditorium and bounce back at me. Super fast. It was astoundingly loud. And I look down, and the conductor's going like this, but of course I have no control over the volume because it's a wireless remote. And after I played, that was the end of the scene, and I heard the conductor storm off stage, and I heard him yelling at the soundman saying, "What do you think this is, a expletive deleted Jimi Hendrix concert?" And so then there was an intermission. And remember, I was new to the orchestra, so they really didn't know me at all. And the orchestra was downstairs in this giant room having refreshments. And there was a long corridor. And James Levine was coming from one side, and I was coming from the other. And all the orchestra saw was a lot of waving of hands like this. And what was actually happening was I was saying, "Oh, I am so sorry. I couldn't. What could I do? I mean, and he's saying, "Oh, no, it's not your fault. I know it was the sound man." Well, then afterwards, the orchestra, because they love it when anything like this happens, they said, "Well, what did you say to the maestro?" So I said, "If you're going to feature me like that, I want more bread. So they said, you said that to the maestro? So a couple of years later, we were doing the same opera, and this was in New York. And as I mentioned, I'd first come out with the chorus, and right before we were to play, I noticed that my shoelace was untied. So I put the lute up against a stool, and I reached down to tie my shoe. And in that time, a chorister comes rushing on the stage, and he knocks over the lute, and it breaks the chanterelle, which is the high tuning peg that has the high string, completely off with the string just dangling there. And I pick up the lute, and the seconds before we have to play, I yank the string and the chanterelle off, and I just throw it in the corner. And the stage conductor looks at me and he says, "What are you going to do?" And then he goes, "Downbeat." And I played. I don't know what I played, but I played. But what was in my mind is, I'm going to have to walk out on stage in a moment. And then what? And that's what happened. So now I walk out on stage. I've got no top string, where most of what I have, my business is on the top string. And what actually happened was, I almost broke out in laughter, because this is kind of one of those dreams that you have, like, you were in college and you never enrolled in the course, or you did enroll but you never attended classes, and now you have to take the test at the end. It was one of those nightmare kind of situations that seemed to me, this is absurd and surreal. What am I going to play? And then it started, it just started, and I played, and I don't know what I played, certainly not the part. I think this may be when my jazz training kicked in a little bit, because I knew the chord changes. So I must have played something that was okay, because no one ever said a word to me afterwards. Like, no one. And I just thought, this is, in a way, just a beautiful experience, just like, wow, just play.
Those are great stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's move it along a little bit to more recent years.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of takes us through your 40s.
Yes.
And then, of course, you've been playing with the Mets since then. But what have been kind of the main activities in more recent years in terms of, I know, a lot of composing, teaching?
Right. Well, I would say a very heavy emphasis on composing. I play the occasional concert and play my own music in the concert. But I've been involved a lot in composing. And something very lovely happened. I was asked to teach a very, very gifted guitarist named Federico Diaz, and this was at the CUNY Graduate Center, and that was just one of the most wonderful experiences working with him. He's so talented, and you're going to hear in a moment. I don't have to talk too much about how good he is, because that will be very obvious. Also, just a wonderful, exceptional person, and we've become friends. And he's still working on his dissertation on Piazzolla. And, I could say a little more about this piece, but I think Federico might be here tonight. If he is, he can introduce it.
He is here. Federico, are you on and able to unmute yourself? He had sent me a message that he was having connection problems.
I know that he's not in New York. He told me he had to go to Rochester, so he might not be online. In which case, I can just introduce the piece.
No, here, I think he's unmuting himself now. Are you here, Federico? If you are, we can't hear you yet. Federico? Are you there? Okay, perhaps not. So maybe Fred, go ahead and introduce it, and then I'll play the video.
He's doing his dissertation on Piazzolla, who is, one of the great musicians of the 20th century. And I was familiar with his music in the way that most guitarists are familiar. But Federico's interaction with Piazzolla goes much deeper than that. He played with his bandione player, and he did. You remember the concert that he did for the Guitar Society, which was a revelation.
Amazing.
And he said, there's a lot of music that people don't know, and I want you to hear it. And he sent me 3 pieces. One was called Ballade, and they were extraordinary pieces. And he said, I'm as part of his dissertation, he'd like to have created some original music for the concert. There would be a concert associated with his dissertation, and he asked me to do it. And I said, well, it sounds wonderful. I don't know if I really am the right person to do that, but I'll give it a shot. And when I first started doing it, I started out with the typical Piazzolla, you know, all the cliches that we know Piazzolla is. And that lasted not very long, thankfully. And I started to find my own expression, because I actually had internalized a lot of Piazzolla's music. And Federico recently recorded it, and here it is. It's called Ballade for Astor Piazzolla. thank you, Federico, for such a beautiful performance. Wow. Just beautiful job
Absolutely
he did with
lovely.
that.
Beautiful video, beautiful piece.
And
Great job, Federico.
he gave me such a gift asking me to do that because that was written right at the very start of March with the quarantine, and it was the worst time going on in New York. And this was something I could do every day that took my mind away from all of that, and it was a great gift for me. So thank you, Federico.
He's unable to unmute himself somehow, but he does say in the chat, thank you, Fred, for such a beautiful musical gift.
Great, great.
So, Fred, we should probably come to sort of the
Sure.
end of this. I did want to share, I mean, we've talked a lot about your compositions, and I just wanted to show kind of your published works, which anybody can take a look at. I'll share my screen here again. Published works on your website, and these are all available. Fred's got a great site, frederichand.com. Chorale, written originally for the
That's right.
New York City Guitar Orchestra.
Absolutely.
And just some fantastic pieces here. So take a look at that. Take a look at his website. So Fred, shall we move to some improvisations?
I think so.
About that.
I think
maybe
so,
we should
yeah.
put you on the spot and
Absolutely. Why not?
make you
Yeah.
see if you still got it.
You know, yeah, exactly. And you know, when I proposed this to you, I thought it would be a lot of fun. And right now I'm sitting here thinking, why did I do that?
Well, we're going to do it.
We're going to
It
do
seems
it.
fun now or not?
Yes.
So you want to explain how we're going to do this?
Well, I will, but I just first want to say that this whole idea came about because I hadn't talked at all about Keith Jarrett. And I know we have to wrap it up, so I'll just say he was one of my great heroes. I couldn't believe the chutzpah of this guy to just get up on stage and play, you know, without any idea what he was going to play, and do that for an hour. And I thought, if I could just do that a little bit, you know. So what I did was I did various kinds of improvisations with audiences, but what I came up with was where the audience would give me, each member would give me a note. Now we get 3 tones, 3 pitches, and from that I would attempt to create a piece of music. So it's you're the master of ceremonies. You get to pick.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of randomly scroll down through the participants list here, and I'm going to call on 3 people, and if you don't mind when I call on you, just unmute yourself and name a note. And when we have the 3, then that's what Fred's going to improvise on. All right? So let's start with, how about David Wolf? Can you give us a note?
F sharp.
F sharp. Okay, first note is F sharp.
All right.
You writing this down, Fred?
I am writing it down. I'll never remember it.
Okay, let's now ask, how about Michael Vascones? Are you there? You want to throw out a note?
Yes. How about A sharp?
Yeah, I didn't like that you were thinking about it too much, Michael. A sharp, that's okay. That's good. Okay.
All right, and for the third one, how about Roberta? Are you there?
I'm here. C sharp.
C sharp. Wow.
All right, there you go.
Okay. So I should tell you, well, first of all, thank you for those notes. And I should tell you just a little bit about my process with this. And that is that, of course, the notes themselves can be played melodically. In this case, I think you've been actually very kind to me. I was expecting a lot worse. So
We're a nice group.
yeah, very sweet. Thank you all so much for being so kind. So there is what those notes would suggest melodically, but also harmonically, we could take those chords. I mean, that is to say, take the notes and build chords on them, and the root, you know, it could be major, it could be minor. This could be. could have, or they could be part of some other kind of chord. They could be the third or the fifth. So there are all different possibilities here. And what I do is this section, what we're doing right now, I call this the noodle. So this is where I just kind of start playing a little bit. And of course, it's all of that and whatever those notes suggest, because it would be a pretty dull composition if I just kept playing that, right? Thank you very much.
Beautiful, Fred.
Well, thanks. That was fun, and that was a nice theme.
We won't be so nice next time.
Okay.
So we have some time for questions, I think. So if anybody would like to, maybe the easiest way to do this, if you have a question in the, well, you could just probably jump in, unmute yourself, or you could raise
Hi.
your hand in the chat, but why don't you just jump in if you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say I've known Fred since he was born. I'm his cousin, a few years older, and most of what he said was true.
Thank you, Norman.
And it was,
We'll
and it
have
was a
rebuttal next
wonderful treat to
Thank
listen
you.
to you and to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's my cousin Norman. We grew up together in Brooklyn. I didn't hear a question
Questions?
though. That's the only thing.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
question
Yeah, yeah.
yet. We need a question.
Anybody have a question for Fred?
I'll answer the question whether I know the answer or not, so you don't have to worry about that.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes. Now, who are you? You look very familiar to me, but the hair, something's different about the hair. You look like a mad professor.
How do you do what you do? You're a master. I just heard that improvisation, and I've heard you play, I think at least twice. This might have been the third time, but it's so inspiring. And can you say, but I realize that's not a question either. I loved Keith Jarrett as well. I just can't improvise the way you do. What, can you remember a Keith Jarrett record? I think I know what you're going to say, but what is of the Keith Jarrett record? First of all, did you ever see him play live? That's my first question.
I had never, unfortunately, seen him play live. And yes, the Cologne concert is what you're thinking of. However, and we both know this, all of those trio records, which start off with him doing free improvisations, you never have any idea what tune he's leading into, are really astounding. And again, this thing, the first question was, how do you do this? And the only honest answer is, I really don't know, except for one thing. You have to get out of the way. You have to stop thinking and let your instincts happen. And that's the challenge, really, is to not think, not try to manipulate, not what should I do now, where should I go, but just start to play and let the music carry you there. And you and I both know that when that happens, there's no other feeling like that, But Keith was the inspiration for doing this kind of thing. I don't know anybody who did it better than Keith.
Well, thank you for such an incredible, thank you, John. But this was, and I know you.
Yes, you do. And by the way, I know you too.
But it was revelatory and such beautiful playing, and of course, the Frederico too. But wow, what an evening! Thanks, John. Thanks to Society. Just incredible. But Fred, I think you should. I think you have a future.
I'm going to work on it. I'm going to work on it.
Like,
you know what, Ben? We'll talk. We'll talk.
The basketball thing doesn't work out. I think.
Yeah, I played recently with my cousin Steve, who's here tonight, and I hadn't really shot seriously in about 50 years, and I just want to say that I really had nothing. Everything I threw up was a brick. And so my suggestion is, whatever it is that you guys are working on, do not take 50 years off from it. It's not going to go well for that. So, yeah. But thank you, Ben.
We had a question in the chat asking if you have any more Julian Bream stories.
Oh, I have lots of Julian Bream stories. They're long.
Give me short ones.
I don't, a short one. Well, the problem is with the Julian Bream stories, shall I say, he was very colorful, okay? And he liked to imbibe. Hold on, my wife is saying something. Yes, honey?
Tell the ping pong story.
Oh, well, I can tell you a short story of me playing ping pong with Julian Bream, which was that
When you were 19.
I was 19, and I was just sort of hoping to get into his good graces. And I was a pretty competitive player, and I happened to have an absolutely vicious forehand slam. Usually when I got that slam going, point over. And Julian was also very competitive. And I didn't unleash the slam for a while, but it was a tight game. And I started to slam. And he really, really didn't like that. It's a very aggressive stroke. And fortunately, a light went on in my head and said, Fred, do you want to study with this person, or do you want to slam him? And the slam disappeared. And that's all I'm going to say about the rest of the ping pong game. But that was quite a moment, that realization. Stop slamming Julian Bream. There are many other stories, but they really can't be told in public.
All right, so we'll save those for another time. Somebody had a question?
Yeah, this is Michael Graves.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, how you doing, Fred?
Great to see you.
I just want to say that you easily could have had a professional career in ping pong. For those people who are listening
Oh,
tonight
we
who
used
didn't know
to play. We used to play.
And I did definitely, I did not go easy on you, but it still didn't end well for me. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I enjoyed those games with you. You were very competitive. I enjoyed that greatly. That was fun.
I really enjoyed this tonight. Thank you very much, Fred. I wish I had some questions, but I'm totally burnt out with my kids running around me, etc. right now. So, but thank you for this.
And thank you for your email, and we will talk.
Awesome. Thank you so
Great.
much, Fred.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Of course.
Maybe time for one more question or comment, if anybody has one. If not, we can wrap it up. I have a question. Oh, all right.
Maestro. Look at your smiling face.
I noticed that, well, I studied with you. We played together like many times, and I'm kind of like used to your like writing.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed that is I don't think I've seen with other guitar players is that you tend to like to harmonize or to improvise with the drop D.
Yes.
Which messes up like most guitarists. And I think I would like if you could just like say something about why you like to use that tuning, which is it changes like the whole harmonic, let's say, perspective for players.
Sure. Well, thanks, Joel. It's a great question. And I'll just start by saying that I did have a student not that long ago that actually said to me, "You do realize that the guitar is tuned with a low E, do you?" Because he never saw me with an E tuning. I do occasionally tune the guitar up to E, but when I discovered that tuning, which is very common in guitar, music, and I have the guitar pressed against my chest, and I hear, and the resonance against the body and the sound of the guitar resonating in that way is so beautiful that I started to always want to have that low D when I was playing. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. All of the chords, the configurations change. But, it's just like learning another language. After a while, you just know that it's there, and you have your voicings in E tunings, and you have your voicings in D tunings. But for me, really, I think the guitar is just so incredibly beautiful in D. And of course, it's very beautiful in other alternate tunings as well. The problem is that the more that you have alternate tunings, then everything is messed up and you can't find anything, and you have to, everything is a one-off. With just the low D, you get that lovely resonance and the ability to go down just a little bit further. But really, not too much is different. It's just the bass note that you have to figure out how to grab it. But you're right. I can't recall the last time I wrote a composition with a E string tune. It's just me. And I apologize to everybody for having to tune the low D down. Thank you for that, Joao. And it's great to see you. And thank you also for all the beautiful work you're doing in your videos. Just amazing. Just amazing. And we have something to talk about later. Yes, we do. Okay. Thank you, Joao.
All right, Fred. Well, we should probably bring this to a close.
Okay. Well, John, let me thank you and thank the Society. You guys have been great supporters of me over the years. And I'm so happy to see you all and to participate in this and to do my bit for the Society. We want to keep it going. It's wonderful. And John, you do an amazing job. You really do. I know you're very humble and you would never say it, so I have to say it for you. So
well, thank you.
Thank you
for your
again.
support of the Society.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And right. I'll see you all later at some point.
Yes, we'll have you back for something else before too long, hopefully.
Great. Okay. Bye-bye,
all right.
everybody.
Thank you, Fred.
Okay. Take care.